Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How's everybody doing today? Inshallah, hope everyone is well. NBIC community, inshallah, today we will be talking about Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. So Brother Haris and myself, we've been going back and forth as far as which personalities to cover. So alhamdulillah, he has covered now Sayyidina Ali and Sayyidina Uthman. And last week I covered Sayyidina Abu Bakr, and today we'll round it out, although not sequential and in order. The last of the four rightly guided caliphs, the Khulafa al-Rashidun, And so today we're talking about Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that لو كان نبيا من بعدي لو كان عمر, that if there were to be a prophet after me, it would be Umar. And so Sayyidina Umar is somebody that is extremely well documented both in the East and the West because of his leadership, because of his supreme justice that he utilized, because of the light of Islam entering into his heart to guide his ummah when he was the Khalifa, the second Khalifa. As a matter of fact, Michael Hart, uh, who wrote the 100 most influential people of all time, where he noted that the Prophet ﷺ was number one in this book. And this is, by the way, a non Muslim. He also, on that same list of 100 people, put Umar ibn Khattab as number 52 because of his servant leadership, because of the number of people and lives that he impacted. And so in the West, he is also considered one of the most influential people that has ever walked the face of this planet. So going back to his early life, Sayyidina Umar, he was somebody that was um, involved in a lot of the vices of the Jahiliyyah society in the Arab society at that time. So alcohol was very common, womenizing, and and things of these nature. So whereas the Prophet ﷺ and Sayyidina Abu Bakr, they never went on the deen and the way of some of their forefathers in practicing idol worship, right? So they were on the same religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam. They were Hanif, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr was the same way. Sayyidina Umar, on the other hand, he did practice idol worship. He did, he used to get drunk. He used to be with women, all of these things. And that was commonplace in society at that time. And so he was kind of going with the flow. There's a narration in the Musnad of Imam Ahmed, rahmatullahi alayh. And this, the conversion of Umar is very well known, which we'll talk about as well. But this is a narration that's sometimes overlooked or not talked about, but it does exist in the Musnad of Imam Ahmed, that Sayyidina Umar was out one night. This is well before his conversion. He's in his mid-20s, and he was determined on this night to get drunk. And so as he's going around Mecca, all of the shops that sold alcohol were closed. So what he decided was, okay, let me go to the Kaaba. Let me go to the Kaaba and use my time over there, because obviously it's not going to happen today. I'm not going to be able to drink alcohol today. So he goes to the Kaaba, and the Prophet ﷺ, he had received Risala at this time, and the Nabi ﷺ, he is at the Kaaba and he is praying by himself. And so Umar thinks to himself that, okay, this is my chance. I'm going to get this man. He's been, causing harm in our society, splitting up families. He's bringing this new religion, and it's causing a lot of problem, and it's stirring up a lot of issues in our society. And so let me just take care of this guy once and for all. And the Prophet ﷺ has no idea that Umar is behind him, right? So this is the scene. And of course, in those days, there's no street lamps, there's no lights. That was way later with Thomas Edison, obviously. But it's completely dark. It's pitch black, and they're at the Kaaba. And Umar hears the recitation of the Prophet ﷺ, because the Prophet ﷺ is actually reciting out loud. And it's actually coming from Surah Al-Haqqa. The Prophet ﷺ is reciting the 69th surah of the Quran, Al-Haqqa, Mal-Haqqa, wa ma adraka mal-Haqqa. And Umar starts to have this internal conversation. Now, what are these words? And it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the Prophet ﷺ, is answering the internal thoughts of Umar. And when the Prophet ﷺ, he gets to verse number 40, Innahu laqawlu rasulin kareem. Indeed, this is the Quran, the word of a noble messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so Umar is thinking, well, what if he's a poet? And then the very next ayah, وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ شَاعِرٍ قَلِيلًا مَا تُؤْمِنُونَ. And it is not the word of a poet. Little do you believe, or are you're a person of little faith. And then he's thinking, well, what if this Muhammad is a soothsayer? وَلَا بِقَوْلِ كَاهِنٍ قَلِيلًا مَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. Nor are these the words of a soothsayer. Little are you a person of remembrance. تَنزِيلٌ مِّن رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. It is the revelation from the Lord of the worlds. And so, subhanAllah, right in this moment, it's as if Omar is having these internal thoughts, and the Prophet ﷺ is completely oblivious to the presence of Omar, that he's behind him and he's actually come to harm him. And Omar, his heart has almost engaged, in this listening of the Quran, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is responding to him through Surah Al-Haqqa, responding to his every single internal thought, subhanAllah. And so at this time, the narration says that Omar says that Islam entered into my heart, and he left the Prophet ﷺ alone. He didn't accept Islam, neither privately or publicly, but he said Islam entered into my heart at that point in my life, and I didn't harm Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We all know, it's very famous that the Prophet ﷺ, he made a dua that in these early days, this is when the Muslims were, less than 100, less than 50 actually. So when Umar radiallahu anhu converted, there were about 40 Muslims, and the Prophet ﷺ had made a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah strengthens and fortifies the Muslims, because they were very weak. Most of the followers of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam at this time were those that were poor, those that were weak and fragile, and others that were higher in stature and socioeconomic status would often pick on the followers of the Prophet ﷺ, these early Muslims. And so the Prophet ﷺ was asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring somebody and strengthen Islam with one of the two Umars, meaning Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, or Abu Jahl, whose name was also Umar. And so just a few weeks prior, Hamza, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, had recently converted. And so now at this point, Allah was starting to strengthen the membership of the Muslims, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Hamza is a very, from a physical stature, from his status in society, people looked up to him. And being the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ now had somebody, almost like a bodyguard, because the first thing that Hamza did was go and exact revenge on Abu Jahl for messing with the Prophet ﷺ. He actually smacked him. And so now the Prophet ﷺ had somebody that was looking after him, his own uncle. And so then after the Prophet ﷺ made this dua, Abu Jahl had rounded up a lot of the leaders of the Quraysh, and Umar was in this gathering. And he said that I am willing to give 100 camels to the person who brings back Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to me dead, right? Somebody has to take care of this man tonight. And so Sayyidina Umar says that, okay, that's it. This is my chance, right? I'm going to go and take care of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam once and for all. And so as he is on his way, Nu'aym, who is another Sahabi, gets in the way of Umar. Umar is on his way to Darul Arqam, where the Prophet ﷺ used to meet with the other members of the Muslims, and he used to, share revelation with them and talk to them about the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the afterlife. So he's on his way to Darul Arqam. Nu'aym said, whoa, where do you think you're going? And he said, I'm going to go take care of Muhammad. He said, well, before you do that, why don't you go take care of the people of your own family? And he says, well, what are you talking about? He says, well, your sister, Fatima, and your brother-in-law, they've also now on the path of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They're also on his path. Now, it wasn't known that Nu'aym had also recently converted into Islam, but he's trying to detract and protect the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, why don't you go take care of your own family first? Worry about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam later. And so Umar, and we all know this narration is very popular. He goes to the house of his sister Fatima, and when he enters into their house, they're reciting from Surah At-Taha, and he says, "Let me see that." And she says, "No, no, you know, you're not a believer, and you can't touch this." And he strikes her, right? He strikes her, and then when her husband comes forth, he also hits him. And so, you know, one of the things about Sayyidina Umar that we have to know is that from a physical attributes, he was a very large man. He was very strong. As a matter of fact, one of the narrations say that when he used to sit on a camel, his feet would come very close to touching the ground. And so this is what's so amazing about Umar is that in the days of Jahiliyyah, he was the embodiment of injustice. Somebody that is, you know, beating on women. He used to also beat his, the servant girl that used to work for him and hit her. Um, and so he was the embodiment of injustice. And then through the light of Islam, he was changed and then would later become the exemplary model of justice later in his life after he took the Shahada. And so, you know, they say that, you know, at this point, his sister Fatima and her husband, they get very bold and they say, well, you know, you can't read from this. You're a pagan. You're not allowed to read from this. And Umar says, okay, well, what do I need to do to be able to read from this? And then they go, you know, tell him to make ghusl and come back. And so then he starts to recite from Surah Taha. And again, Islam and the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala penetrate and enter into his heart. And he continues then from there to Darul Arqam to seek out the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The other Sahabi are there, so you know somebody answers the door. They let him in, and they let the Prophet sallallahu know that Umar is here to see you. The Prophet sallallahu is in his quarters with Hamza radiallahu anhu, and he says you can let him in. And Umar comes, and the Prophet sallallahu, you know, he stands up to Umar because you know the only way that you're going to be able to negate a bully and stand up to him is to be, you know, eye to eye and toe to toe with him, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he grabs Umar very boldly and he says, "Oh, Umar, if you continue down this path, then you will have nothing in your life but torment and punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you need to change your ways." And he says, "Ya Rasulullah, I've come here to enter into Islam." And Umar takes the Shahada, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He becomes a Muslim at this time. And so now the Prophet sallam, he has Hamza, he has Umar, and this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fortifying and strengthening the members of Islam. And at this time, there were about 40 Muslims. And Umar was the first to then really say that we need to bring this deen into the public sphere. And he asked for the Prophet ﷺ's permission to go to the Kaaba and basically announce his entrance into Islam. We go further now, you know, into the life of Sayyidina Umar. This is after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ. This is after the passing of Sayyidina Abu Bakr, when Umar is now made the second Khalifa of Islam to lead the believers at this time. And this is when, you know, a lot of the edges and the empire of Islam was starting to expand. Umar was one of the people that really helped to propagate and open up so many of the lands to the Muslims. There is a famous narration where he had appointed as governor of Egypt Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, and his son, the governor's son, is racing with a Coptic Christian man, right? And the Coptic Christian man, he wins in the race, and Amr ibn al-As's son, he hits this Coptic Christian man, okay, and humiliates him, and he says, "That is from me and in the name of the governor." Right? And so this man, he knows that there is a just Khalifa in Medina, and so he travels and he goes and he complains to Sayyidina Umar. Now, when he finds Sayyidina Umar is at the masjid and he is cleaning the masjid. SubhanAllah, right? This is your leader. right? He is the embodiment of servant leadership. He's serving the people, right? And he's cleaning the masjid. And this Coptic Christian man comes with this somewhat little issue, right? And he complains to Sayyidina Umar, and he says that these people, they robbed me of my dignity and they humiliated me. And Sayyidina Umar could have easily said, listen, I don't have time for stuff like this. I'm taking care of the affairs of the ummah. I have bigger fish to fry. He didn't say any of that. To him, this was important. It was important that that justice be laid and that it be shown. And so he said, I want to hear their testimony, because you have one side of the story, but I want to hear their side of the story. And so he brings forth Amr ibn al-As and his son, radiallahu anhu, and he says, well, let me know what happens. And he listens to both testimonies, and he makes the declaration that yes, you wronged this person, this Coptic Christian man, and so now he gets to give you a lash for the son, the one who did the hitting, and a lash for the one whose name he did it in. And so this was this is goes to show us how just he was. He was Al Farouk. This was a nickname that he had earned. That somebody, Umar ibn al Khattab Al Farouk, somebody that distinguishes between haqq and batil, between truth and falsehood. That Umar was, he had the gift. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ said that if there were to be a prophet after me, it would be Umar. This is one of the main attributes of Umar, that he knew how to distinguish between truth and falsehood. Even if that was at the expense of letting people know that yes, the Muslim in this case is in the wrong, right? And the non-Muslim deserves his rights. Umar al-Khattab, Sayyidina Umar, he was very famous for his night patrols. This was something that he learned from Sayyidina Abu Bakr, who used to go around and look after the people. And so Umar used to say, actually, that he was afraid of a donkey in Iraq, that he would complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the donkey would complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment against Umar. This is the type of and level of concern that he had of the people and even the animals under his supervision during his caliphate. And so once he comes upon him and his night patrol, his entourage, they come upon a house where it's a poor family, they don't have any food, and the mother has a pot of water and she's just stirring, and he says to her, what are you doing? And she says that we don't have any food, I just have water in here, and I'm just stirring the pot, and I'm hoping that eventually the kids will fall asleep, meaning they'll fall asleep hungry, just from the rhythm of the pot stirring and so on and so forth. And so Omar is extremely distressed at this situation. He runs back to Baitul Mal. He grabs provisions, meat and wheat and all sorts of food items, and he brings it back. And he says that what happened to the kids? And she says, well, they were listening to me stir, and then they eventually fell asleep. And so Omar himself cooks the food, and he waits for the kids to wake up. And when they wake up, they eat, and then he leaves. On the way from Baitul Mal, this is what's so interesting about Umar. On the way from Baitul Mal, listen to this. When he was bringing that food to this woman's house, his servant that was with him, he says, Ya Amirul Mu'mineen, oh leader of the believers, let me carry this for you. And he says to him, will you carry my burdens on the day of judgment? SubhanAllah, look at this type of leader. Imagine if we had leaders like this in America, in the Muslim world. They don't make leaders like this anymore. He says, will you carry my burdens for me on the day of judgment? In another episode, before we talk about his famous, the way that he was assassinated and what took place in those days, we know about when he conquered Jerusalem. Sayyidina Umar conquering Jerusalem, and there was no bloodshed. Very similar to the Fath of Mecca. And when he was asked by the leader of the Church of the Sepulchre to pray inside of the church, through his wisdom, Umar said that he didn't want Muslims in the latter years to come and make that a masjid and pray there, and step over the rights of other Christians that might be already praying there, and he didn't want them to perceive it as a masjid. So he stepped outside and prayed there in Jerusalem. And lo and behold, today we have Masjid Umar, which is right over there in Jerusalem, still today. Now we go as we are, inshallah, wrapping up. Um, I want to also mention in the 18th year of the Hijrah, there was a famine. And Sayyidina Umar used to be very, very afraid, and he used to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at this time. Food was so scarce that he didn't want the Muslim empire to crumble and the Muslims to die under his watch, under his khilafah, right? And in those days, whether it was meat or butter or just any kind of luxury item in terms of food, he would deprive himself of it. And one time he saw his son bring home a watermelon, and he says, "How dare the son of the leader of the believers have a watermelon with him when my own ummah can't partake in this watermelon? When they don't have these luxuries, who are we to have these type of luxuries?" And so he's famous for saying, "How can I be a shepherd if I'm not struck with the same burdens as my flock? How can I be a shepherd if I'm not struck with the same burdens as my flock?" He used to not only sympathize with his people, but he used to empathize with them as well. He used to put himself in their shoes and be with them in those struggles. Now we go to the time where Sayyidina Umar is leading Salatul Fajr. And a couple of days before this, Umar met his demise by a man by the name of Abu Lu'lu al-Majusi, who a couple of days before had implied something to Umar in a conversation that he was going to do something to him, that he was going to bring some harm to him, and it was just implied. So Umar, he sought counsel of his companions, and he explained what had happened, and they said, "Well, why don't we take him out right now?" And because of his justice and because of his wisdom, he said, "Well, I can't just take a man's life without having concrete, hard proof evidence. And so we'll let it be." And so Sayyid Umar is leading Salatul Fajr, and this man, he had a double pointed dagger that he had been soaking in poison for over one day, over 24 hours. And he makes his way through the Sahaba while they're in the middle of the prayer. And he he stabs Umar 3 times, once on the shoulder, a huge gaping gash across the stomach, and then another one on his, another part of his body. And Sayyidina Umar at this point, what is he thinking? He should be thinking about his life, of course. And he's thinking about, are the people going to finish their prayer? And immediately he grabs Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, and he brings him to the front to finish their prayer. As a matter of fact, Sayyidina Umar was one of those people, when we say astau and we're trying to line up the people, shoulder to shoulder, toe to toe, he used to walk the ranks of the Muslims. He wanted to bring discipline to the Sahaba and the Muslims of that time. And he used to make sure that everybody was lined up in perfect order. And so when this happens, he brings Abdurrahman ibn Auf, which he learned from whom? The Prophet ﷺ. When the Prophet ﷺ was dying, the Prophet ﷺ, he said as-salat, as-salat, as-salat 3 times. That was the most important thing to the Prophet ﷺ. And so Abu Lu'lu al-Majusi, on his way out, he stabs another 13 Sahaba who also lost their life that day. And they carry Umar to his house. He's going in and out of a coma. And when he comes to, they ask him, saying, "Umar, are you okay?" And he says, the first thing he says is, "Did the people pray?" Exactly what the Prophet ﷺ said. Did the people pray? And then realizing himself that he had not finished Salatul Fajr because he had been taken down by the stab wounds, he says, "Stand me up." And he falls down. They say again, "Stand me up so I can pray." And he falls down again. And then finally, he understands his own situation, and he is in bed, and he finishes his prayer. And he goes to his son, Ibn Umar, Abdullah Ibn Umar, and he says, "I want you to go to Hazrat Aisha, and I want you to ask her. The most important thing to me now is, if this is the last of my days, and they knew this was the last of his days. They gave him some nabid, which is a drink. You know, when you soak dates, it makes this brown water. If you soak it overnight, they give him some of that. So when he drank that, it was actually coming out from his stomach, and then they give him milk, and they saw that that milk was coming out from his stomach. So they knew that that was the wound that was going to eventually take his life. But he says that, you know, this is the end of the road for me, and I want you to ask Aisha if she will, from her permission, allow me to be buried next to my Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and next to my companion, my best friend, Sayyidina Abu Bakr. And it was understood at this time that Hazrat Aisha would be the one that would be buried here, you know, next to her husband, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, and her father, Sayyidina Abu Bakr. And this was her room where they are buried, her house where they are buried. And so Ibn Umar goes to Hazrat Aisha. The news has reached her at this time of the dire condition of Umar, and that he's probably in his last days. And he asks her, you know, this is what my father has asked. And she said that, you know, when I passed, I wanted nothing more than to be buried in my own room next to my husband and next to my father. But today I prefer Umar over me. Now, this is the embodiment of want for your brother what you want for yourself. But this is the next step ahead of that. This is ithar, what the scholars say, that when you prefer more for your brother than you prefer for yourself. This is how these people lived out their lives, right? Islam wasn't, you know, a collection of hadiths and the revelation in the Quran. They used to live this, every bit of it. They used to live it and put it into practice. And so he comes back, and Umar says, "What did she say?" And he says, "Qalat ma tuhib." She said what you love, what you desire to hear. That's what she said. She agreed. And then Umar says something profound. He says that when I pass away, go to her, because right now the emotions might be high, the feelings are, you know, very elevated, and so perhaps she said yes now, but go to her after I have passed away, and then ask her again when things have settled down a bit, and see if she still feels the same, and if she does, then and only then bury me there. So there's this, you know, there's this regard and this level of respect that the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, you know, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, Umar, has for his, you know, for al-Mu'mineen, the mother of the believers, and she reciprocates as well by giving him that spot. And then we know, of course, that that spot was indeed given to Sayyidina Umar. And Hazrat Aisha, as a matter of fact, this is just a small lesson that we get from her, of her, you know, monumental mountains of lessons that she has in her life. But one of the things she said is that once Umar was buried there, I used to go into my own room where my father and my husband are buried, and I would, before I wouldn't have to, but now I would wear hijab, right? Out of her modesty. Even after Umar he's dead, he's passed away, and he's buried there, she would wear hijab there. And this is, you know, a lesson to both men and females to, you know, be regardful of the guidelines of modesty that we have, not just for women, but also for men as well. So this is the life of Sayyidina Umar. And in the United Nations Charter, I'll finish with this. He is quoted as saying, "How can you enslave a man who was born free?" How can you enslave a man who was born free? This is a quote from Sayyidina Umar that is documented in the United Nations Charter. So he's a man that is very well documented in the annals of history, and he's praised both in our tradition, in the Islamic tradition, in the East, as well as in the West. And so that now, alhamdulillah, rounds out our rightly guided caliphs. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of us. My apologies for going a few minutes over. Barakallahu li wa lakum wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.